Hey everyone, you're tuned into InfoQuench with Jeff.
And Amy. Join us as we talk about anything.
And everything.
All the stuff that makes life interesting.
So let's get to it. Hey everybody, and welcome to InfoQuench. I'm your host, Jeff.
And I'm Amy.
And this is part 2 of the book, where we're talking about the book Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl.
This is the part where I hold up the cover so Jeff can remember which book we were talking about.
And that's exactly what she did. If we had it on video, it would be on video, but it's not on video.
So we gave a lot of background in part 1, so if you haven't checked out part 1 yet, Charlie's saying check it out. You can hear him meowing in the background.
Psst, get, go on, get.
Hopefully he won't be puking up any fur balls in the middle of this episode. We'll see.
Jeez.
I referenced that I had shared a quote by Viktor Frankl long before I read this book, and I had shared it on Instagram, and I just wanted to start this episode off with that quote. And it was, when we are no longer able to change a situation, we are challenged to change ourselves.
Yes. Someone else said something quite similar to that. I just recently read that quote, but it was very, very simple. It was something like, when we really want something to change, we need to change ourselves, or something along those lines.
Be the change you want to see in the world.
Yeah, maybe.
That sort of thing. There are a few different, I guess, quotes that are similar to that. But
yeah.
I had shared that quote thinking it was fitting in light of the pandemic that we were going through, not realizing, again, that Viktor Frankl. I didn't know who he really was in terms of being an author and being the author of this particular book and his experience in concentration camps. But
and you were saying
I just felt that was a powerful quote.
That is part of the first section of the book. The first half of the book is based upon his, harrowing experience in a concentration camp and stuff. But then it changes, right?
So if you haven't listened to part 1, listen to part 1
definitely
to sort of get that background.
1.
Because yes, definitely the first part of this book is around his experience in the concentration camps, and then the latter part of the book discusses a bit around his methods of therapy. Because he is a psychiatrist. So just to read a brief section from the book that I felt relates to the quote that I had shared. In the book, he talks about that man is not fully conditioned and determined, but rather determines himself whether he gives in to conditions or stands up to them. In other words, man is ultimately self-determining. Yeah. Man does not simply exist, but always decides what his existence will be, what he will become in the next moment.
That's right. I would agree with that. We decide our own destiny. Our destiny isn't decided for us, I feel. You know what I mean? We sort of, right the ship and turn it to, we navigate the waters. So I can have all kinds of little
metaphors
and stuff. And
I know, and I know, and our listeners don't even get to see your hand gestures.
I know, I'm doing
quite a loss.
The hand gestures of the directions that the ship can go in, because that is really what our life can do. Or not do, depending on which way you want to go.
And I think it's a powerful way to look at things. And I think when we're in the midst of a situation that's out of our control, a particularly negative situation, it's comforting to know that there are still some freedoms left. And, I guess the ultimate freedom is that we decide how we're going to react to any situation.
Yeah, I agree with that.
And that there is, a responsibility that comes with that freedom. Mm-hmm. One of the other things that's referenced in this book that I feel is very fitting now for our neighbors south of the border is that Viktor Frankl promoted the idea of the fact that he felt the Statue of Liberty on the East Coast of the United States should be balanced with a statue of responsibleness on the West Coast, because he felt with freedom comes responsibility. And when we think about what's happening in terms of the pandemic situation and how there are a lot of views around freedom and associating that with rights.
Yeah.
Whether it's even rights to bear arms, rights, freedom of assembly, or all
wear a mask.
Yeah. So, and people feeling that wearing a mask is against their personal rights, their personal freedoms, their personal liberties.
Incidentally, just tonight during the most recent Trump rally, they came over the loudspeaker and said, "Everybody, please put on a mask if you have one," and they booed them. So there you go. So that's how strongly people feel about their rights, no matter what it is. They can decide to do it or not to do it. So they're being self-determined, right?
So exactly. And he felt so those rights or that liberty should be balanced with responsibleness, right? Yeah. That we need to also have some responsible. And I think that, we're we are responsible for the wellness of our community as a whole, and that's why.
There's a part though.
This is a little PSA: wear your masks.
Yeah, yeah, wear your mask.
Wear your mask.
But there's a part where that responsibility, though, that you feel can be, directed in a negative way that can definitely hinder the progress of civilization, because we're seeing it right now. I mean, not to get too political, but in south of the border, Trump is sort of, making a lot of people feel like they're self-determined to do the right thing when it certainly isn't.
Well, it's irresponsible.
It's irresponsible, exactly. Yeah, I mean, it's anyway.
Yeah, we've just lost all our Trump supporters as listeners.
Oh, great.
Oh, well.
See you later. Cry me a river.
All right, back to the book. So, another thing that Viktor Frankl really talks a lot about in the book is just the importance of hope in getting through a situation. And I can't even imagine what it would be like in a concentration camp situation, but he does talk about how when somebody has lost hope, they could pick up on that, and often death would soon follow.
Yeah.
So he talks about the idea, for instance, that cigarettes would be given out as a reward, maybe for, especially hard work, or I think they got very few rewards in the concentration camp, but the odd time they would get cigarettes, and most of the people who were there would trade those cigarettes in for soup.
Yeah.
Because soup was going to sustain life.
Yeah.
So
keep
he
them
said,
alive.
oftentimes when they would see somebody who would just decide to give in and just smoke their cigarettes, they knew that they had given up, and that they were just going for those last few pleasures in life, and that soon they would be.
They didn't need soup, right? Because
their time remaining was short, I guess, on the earth.
Yeah. It's like their cigarette was, yeah.
And he talked about, that the highest frequency of deaths in the camp by far was the week between Christmas and New Year's, because many people would get through the year with the hope or the thought of being home for Christmas with their families, and when that wouldn't come to fruition, then they would. And it's just as much as I'm very much a person of science, I also understand it's undeniable the tie between someone's mindset and how that influences, their immunology and how they're able to fight off something. He even talks about one man who had dreamt during his time in the camp that he would be released on a specific day, on March 30th. And so he'd had this dream, I think it was in January or February, that they would be released from the camp, and he really clung to that. And
that was his hope.
And when March 30th came and they were still there, he fell into despair and he passed away the following day.
Yeah, wow.
And I think that does speak to the timing and the power of the human mind, and
absolutely,
and hope, and trying to get yourself to get through that, and that people would very much seek comfort in thoughts of their future and beyond. And he said that a prisoner, not somebody who's in the concentration camps, but just a prisoner who's in prison for a crime, would actually be, they were very envious of that person's situation because they had an end date.
Yeah.
And he said the thing about being in a concentration camp is they had no end date. So to have that in your mind and
eternal hell.
It is, and and completely indefinite, and with no news of where the battlefront was and what was taking place in the world around them. They were completely cut off from that. So that was incredibly taxing on people mentally. So again, as a psychiatrist, he did reflect on all of those mental pieces of it.
Yeah. No, I and as a psychiatrist, you would have to. There would be so many different facets to delve into. Do
you feel that the mind has
absolutely
control over, like, if you're sick, or do you feel like
the mind and the body? Like, there's stories.
Does optimism help you pull through?
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, if you're optimistic, that is what I would. You know how whenever something really bad happens in society, people send thoughts and prayers. Well, that's fine and dandy, but it doesn't really fix the problem, right? But if you're being optimistic, you're going to, like I said earlier, guide your ship in a way that leads you to make decisions that lead to more optimistic decisions, and and outcomes. And so I feel being optimistic is extremely important in all of life.
Well, so that's interesting that you use the example of thoughts and prayers, because that's often put on when you see a social media post, Facebook
Yes.
or whatever, and somebody's going through a hard situation. People will write thoughts and prayers, and then you'll sort of see the people who maybe don't follow a particular religion and don't necessarily pray will say, sending positive thoughts your way.
Yeah.
So if you think of it from that perspective,
But then there are also
then
those
the power of...
I'm sorry. I'm trying to cut you off. I just didn't want to lose my thought.
You weren't successful. I was aggressive in my
I know you were
sentence
good. Go ahead.
structure.
Go.
I wasn't even stopping for a breath.
No, I know. It's good. You shouldn't.
So what the heck were we talking about? Oh yeah, no, thoughts and prayers. So
Yeah.
if you think about the idea that mindset does have a powerful influence, then the idea of prayer or whatever that may mean for you, if you're not, if you're just spiritual or you just positive vibes or however you want to word it, can definitely have an impact if
thoughts...
if the person themselves hears that and it puts their mindset into more of a mindset of hope.
But thoughts and prayers, to me, I mean, taking out the religious aspects of prayers and stuff and what people believe prayer to be, it's just like a cloud to me. It doesn't really do anything, like, you know what I mean? But being optimistic about change does change something. Do you know what I mean?
But
like sending thoughts and prayers is not going to change the problem that they're sending the thoughts and prayers about. Like if there's another mass shooting at a school and stuff, if you send thoughts and prayers, that's just like a lazy way to say, yeah, I'm thinking of you or whatever.
Okay, I understand what you're saying there. And I mean, I definitely, in situations like that, action is by far the most important thing. But if you're sending thoughts and prayers to somebody who's fighting, cancer or terminal illness or just going through a difficult time, if reading those positive messages influences their own mindset to be more positive, and you've mentioned that you feel that having a positive mindset can help your immunology or help you fight off something, then maybe there is a bit of a benefit of having that out there.
I think that there's benefit in being optimistic about any sort of situation you can think of in life. But then, when you send clouds, when you send like things that don't even really exist to try and fix a problem, well, it'll never fix the problem. Do you know what I mean?
I do. Yes, I think, and I agree with that. Like, I think it's...
So being optimistic about an actual bona fide change is what really people need. But
I don't see positive thoughts flowing through the air and magically fixing an issue that it needs to be addressed with action.
I mean,
but I do feel like somebody personally thinking more positively will have an effect on their own immune system to deal with whatever they're dealing with, and affect their mindset if they're going through a difficult situation, just to know other people are thinking of them.
Absolutely,
so, maybe it's not...
In that way, there is a little bit of optimism included in, like, just thinking about somebody.
Yes.
You know what I mean? But with everything in life, there can be a negative and a positive repercussion of anything that you do, right? Somebody will look at that and say... Well, people do look at thoughts and prayers and think it's completely useless. It's like, no, there's no point in doing it at all.
Right.
Like, it's just like, that's not going to change the school shootings. Like, why? Thoughts and prayers, we need action,
But if it is directed towards a specific individual and they're seeing that and that helps them feel better, then it's definitely incredibly powerful.
That's definitely a good positive thing.
So I think we're in agreement on this one.
I think we're in agreement on
this. We beat that dead horse.
It's a really interesting conversation, though. Hopefully our listeners are... thinking about these sort of concepts on their own, like in their own particular way. Are you? Just joking.
I am. I'm going to jump to another piece that I had talked about in part one, and it's something that has always been so hard for me to grasp, is how human beings can do what they did to other human beings in the context, particularly, I guess, specifically speaking around the Holocaust, but I mean, in general, world over.
Are you familiar with that? Sorry, I know you might even be ready to talk about this right now, but I'm not sure. But are you familiar with that psychological experiment where just was a regular person that would press a button that would shock somebody, and then the the person doing the experiment was saying, okay, but if you hit this button, you could kill them. And then like some people actually hit the button just to see what would happen. Just a regular person, just like you or me or anybody. You
Oh,
know what I mean?
really?
Yeah.
No,
I
I've
guess,
not heard of that.
Oh,
specific-
I should have had a little bit more background on it. But yeah, it was just like they they believed somebody because they had like the scientific garb on and stuff, and they were like being very sincere and saying, okay, you need to press this button. I'm sure that there are other parameters of the experiment that I'm not remembering, but like that's the gist of it.
Okay, and
Yeah.
then you're saying the person would then hit the button that would hurt the person?
Yeah, which could potentially kill the person. Like the person
But
saying,
why? Just to see if the scientist
just to
is telling the
see
truth?
if a regular person is capable of doing that kind of thing. That was the whole experiment, just to see if anybody.
Oh, they would be directed to do
Yeah,
that.
they'd be directed to do it. So
Oh.
it would definitely probably tie right into the book that you read.
Okay.
To a man's search, like what was happening at the concentration camps and whatnot.
Okay. That's a
People-
horrible experiment.
I know it is, but like yeah, it was done. I'm gonna
Whenever
have
it took place and whoever did
yeah,
it, it was
I know I
it
should
was
have.
horrible.
I just know of it, but I don't know what the heck it's called or anything. But yeah,
But no, I was speaking specifically around, the camp guards. So Viktor Frankl, being a psychiatrist, was also interested in what the psychological makeup was of the camp guards. So he did talk about four I guess, explanations around how people could do this. How is it possible that men of flesh and blood could treat others
I've always
as
wondered
so
that
many
as well.
prisoners say they have been treated, is how he referenced it. And I mean, he was there and he experienced it. So first of all, he said that among the guards, there were some sadists, and sadists in the purest clinical sense. So people who derive pleasure from causing pain to others exist in the general population, and they existed in the guard population. So he said, of course, there were, just law of averages, there were people who actually enjoyed.
I'm sure somebody who
inflicting
isn't
pain.
a sadist could be conditioned to be one as well. The Nazis were probably
Right. Well,
quite-
and I guess
quite good at that.
So I guess his idea was first that
Yeah.
there are people who are naturally born
Absolutely, yeah.
sadists.
Yep.
Then, second of all, he said that the sadists were the ones who were chosen to carry out the most, sinister of tasks.
Yeah.
So when they had a particularly, brutal work duty, or perhaps it was somebody who was in charge of the gas chambers and that, that piece of it, they were selected because they were sadists, and people knew that they would carry that out, and
Yeah.
they would carry it out with pleasure. So that was sort of the second reasoning around. The third point he had around it was that the majority of the guards, those who weren't sadists, they're just regular people, their feelings had just simply been dulled by the
Yeah.
number of years
conditioned from
in which, in ever increasing doses, they had witnessed brutal methods at the camp. And he would say that these morally and mentally hardened men at least refused to take active part in the sadistic measures, but they did not prevent others from carrying them out. So
normalized it.
They were sort of the bystanders. And I mean, we see that in a lot of situations, even, nowadays. There are a lot of times things happen. Brutal situations will happen in the public, and bystanders will sit there and witness it
Yeah.
and not take part in preventing it. So there were, a huge number of guards who did just stand by. And then the fourth point around this is he said that even among the guards there were some good ones. There were people who took pity on them. And he actually references a commander of the camp that he realized after he was released, that particular commander had spent a lot of his own personal money to go into a nearby town to buy medicine for people who were suffering in the concentration camps, to help
Knowing
keep
full
them.
well that a lot of them wouldn't make it, though, which is interesting.
No, but they had typhus outbreaks
Yeah.
and that sort of thing, so he would spend his own money to do that.
Right.
And there was actually one, and I think it was that particular commander, that when their camp was liberated, some of the prisoners actually hid the commander from the troops in the woods and to protect him, and wouldn't release him until they promised not to hurt him, because they really felt strongly that this was a good man who was forced into a difficult position. And
Yeah.
so I guess, the message around that is he he felt, the author felt that there were not, by virtue of being a prisoner, they were not all angels. Not all prisoners were angels, and not all guards were devils.
Yeah.
He said there were good and bad amongst both groups of people, just as there is in the general population.
Yeah.
So that did shed a little bit of light for me on how people, on I guess the psychology behind. It's still freaking hard to get your head around
what happened.
What happened.
I agree, but I could see the Nazis being very adept at finding those people that fit into the roles the best. Like the sadists, they would sniff them out and put them in where they needed to go. Unfortunately, but it's just you're right. It's horrible.
You're right. I mean, it was a manipulation of people, and you see it the world over. You see it with cults. You see it. There are individuals who are able to manipulate others, and
they normalized.
Had them do things that they wouldn't otherwise do.
They normalized evil. So essentially, what they did.
I want to get into the latter part of the book where Viktor Frankl talks about therapy. And what's fascinating about this is he references the fact that he had a manuscript drafted before he went into the concentration camps, and it was confiscated from him and destroyed. I think they burned it in front of him. And it was his life's work, but he had developed a method of therapy even before going through this experience.
What was it called?
It was called logotherapy.
Logotherapy.
And this is interesting because the word logo, which we always think about with brands, a logo for a brand or a company, logo is actually the Greek word for meaning, which makes sense when you think about brands. But logotherapy is the idea of using, the meaning of life or man's search for meaning as a means of therapy. So in addressing things like, I mentioned his work in part 1 around suicide prevention and dealing with people who are going through depression and anxiety. So he would use logotherapy. So as I guess in contrast to that, at the time, Freud was his school of thought, and his school of therapy was around the idea that man was motivated by pleasure. So we talk about, the id, the ego, the superego. Yeah. And Viktor Frankl actually corresponded with Freud in his younger years when he was studying psychiatry. And later on, he had, he basically went along on a different path and came up with his own school of therapy. And then he also studied Adler. And so where Freud focused on pleasure, Adler focused on power. So Adler's school of thought in terms of psychiatry was that we're all motivated by success and power and, that idea of achievement, and that's what our chief motivator is in life. But Viktor Frankl thought that the meaning of life is really what drives people and can help with, giving direction when people are going through depression and that sort of thing. So
it is the search for meaning that he believed directed people's lives. Really.
He felt it was key. He felt it was a key piece of people, that a lot of times people were going through an existential crisis, and that was the source of a lot of people's issues. He also believed that there were chemical imbalances that needed to be addressed by medication and in terms of basic psychology, but he did feel also that there were a lot of people that could be just helped with finding meaning and purpose in their life. So I just want to read a passage where he talks a little bit about the meaning of life, and he states that I doubt whether a doctor can answer this question in general terms around the meaning of life, for the meaning of life differs from man to man, from day to day, and from hour to hour. What matters, therefore, is not the meaning of life in general, but rather the specific meaning of a person's life at any given moment. So, and he puts this as for reference, he puts the question in general terms. It would be comparable to asking a chess champion, "Tell me, master, what's the best move in the world?"
Right.
Well,
the best move
there's
at
no
that
such
time.
Move, right? It depends on the particular situation. It depends on the
That's
opponent.
a really great analogy. And you love chess too. You must have ate that one right up.
I did.
Actually, I think you ate
chess.
the whole book.
I love this quote. It says chess in it. I'm all over it. Sold. But he says the same holds true for human existence, that one should not search for an abstract meaning of life. everyone has their own specific vocation or mission in life to carry out a concrete assignment which demands fulfillment. Therefore, therein he cannot be replaced, nor can his life be repeated. Thus, everyone's task is as unique as his specific opportunity to implement it. So that kind of goes back to, in part one, I talked a little bit about the idea of everybody's very unique in who they are, and that we all have sort of our own special role to play.
We definitely do. We definitely do. I'm realizing more and more, because this is part 2 of this podcast based on this one book, is that I really need to read this book.
You definitely do.
I think it would be beneficial. It would have been very beneficial if I had read it before we did these podcasts. So maybe we can revisit this book after I read it at a later date. We can do another podcast.
I'd like to get your take on what you took away.
Yeah, I'm sure. Well, I mean, maybe I don't even need to read it because you're giving me the
well, no, it's so
gems.
packed with stuff that I bet you different things would speak to you than they do to me. So when he talks about the meaning of life, he really does talk about the fact that it can happen in 3 different ways. And one is by creating a work or doing a deed. And that one is kind of self-explanatory. You know, when you do something that really contributes to, whether it's, whether you're defining the theory of relativity or coming up with an invention that will change,
Yeah, the iPad.
or something like that, right? Number 2 is by experiencing something or encountering someone, and that's the idea of love. Mm-hmm. That impact of, he talks about love is the only way to grasp another human being in the innermost core of his personality. No one can become fully aware of the very essence of another human being unless he loves them.
What would we do without each other, baby?
There you go. And then the third meaning of life is around the attitude that you take towards unavoidable suffering.
The thoughts and prayers? Basically?
Well, that comes back to where we started the episode with, when we're no longer able to change a situation, we're challenged to change ourselves. And what does that mean?
What does it mean, really, though, to change yourself? How do you do that? Do you know what I mean? Like, just in layman's terms, like, what if you're going to change yourself, you're going to change who you are, you're making decisions, right? You're making decisions about your life.
It's how you're going to deal with, if something is, are you going to make the best of it, or are you going to make the worst of it? When he talks about the idea of suffering, he was challenged actually by, he mentions there was an elderly general practitioner who consulted him about, he had severe depression because his wife had passed away. Mm-hmm. And he couldn't overcome the loss of his wife, and it had been 2 years. And he really struggled with how to help him with that. And how do I help you with finding meaning in that? And so what he asked him, he said, what would have happened if you had died first and your wife would have had to survive you? And the man said, well, it would have been terrible for her. She would have suffered a lot. Mm-hmm. And he said, well, you see then, by your suffering, you've spared her. By you being the one who outlived her.
You helped her out.
And surviving her and mourning her, you've saved her some suffering. So he felt that in some way suffering ceases to be suffering at the moment it finds meaning.
Yeah, that makes sense.
The meaning, is that you've done a sacrifice to prevent somebody else's suffering.
It's really interesting, though, like when people say they're going to change their lives, like, what does that mean? Like, does it mean incrementally? Are you going to go a different place for your coffee? Like that really does change your life, Like those are things, but then you can do huge, huge changes in your life. You could sell all your possessions and go on worldwide travel,
Well, I mean, in the context of Viktor Frankl, he went through the ultimate suffering experience of the concentration camps. And although he had already had in his mind the idea of logotherapy and this means of it, it became all the more powerful because of his experiences. And then I think about how he was able to change the lives of so many people through this book.
Let me ask you how this book changed your life. It's a book. It's words. Words are powerful. How did those powerful words change your life?
Oh, I feel like we've got more to talk about with this book, and we're coming in on
okay. We got a minute. We got a minute. So you want me to talk? You got a minute to say how your life has changed from this book.
Well, I want to talk about a few more things around it. So I think
maybe we do need a part 3.
We're going to need a part 3. I still want to talk a little bit around the idea of how we
Yeah.
can envy the elderly rather than envy the youth.
Yes.
And there's still some more
Okay.
meat in this book.
It's settled.
And-
Part 3.
And those are part of the keys of why I found this book so special for me.
Oh, okay. All right. Well, I really enjoyed this conversation. Thank you so much.
It's been fun.
Yeah. Thanks for listening, everybody, and we'll see you in part 3.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thanks for listening.
And remember, you can catch up on past episodes at infoquench.com.
Or just about anywhere else you get your podcasts.
Be sure to follow us on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram.
And help spread the word about InfoQuench.
Till next time.